Hello, I am Grete Ots, paper conservator from the Conservation and Digitalization Center CONSERVING Estonia. And first, I would like to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our work here today. And together with my colleague, book conservator Tulvi-Hanneli Turo, we will tell you the story of the conservation of the Piirissaar's Old Believers Gospel that was saved from the fire on the island Piirissaar. First, I will talk about the origin of the binding and give an overview of the conservation of the text block of the binding, and Tulvi will take over and talk about the rest of the conservation process. But quickly, where is Piirissaar? It's a tiny island on the Lake Peipsi. The lake is the border between Estonia and Russia, and the name of the island also means the same in translation. Piiri means border and Saare means island. Border island Piirissaar is a home for Old Believers community who had a chapel with an important collection of icons and books. Unfortunately, on May 16th in 2016, a sad event happened and several houses burned down on the island. Among them was also the chapel. Some of the valuables of the collection were rescued from the fire. One of the items was the 17th century gospel book printed in Moscow. To prevent information and mold damage, this 500-page binding had to be dried quickly. So already next day, the gospel was taken from the island and brought for lyophilization to the Tallinn University Institute of History. The gospel was dried there for 36 hours in a freezer sublimator 700 at the conservation laboratory. As a result, the formation of the binding was minimum, and it was possible even to close it in an original manner. Here you can also see the front cover covered with red silk velvet and the decorative plates. Four in the corners are depicting the evangelists, and the central one carries the image of crucified Christ. The text block is made out of rag paper with varied thickness. The text is in Old Cyrillic and printed with red and black ink. And book also has several monochrome prints. After some close observation, it became clear that the condition of the book had not been good even before the fire. The block had been damaged by mold, moisture, and pests. Numerous wax stains throughout the binding had made the paper translucent and fragile. In addition, the book had been soaked in some kind of oil with a very strong smell. Still, several paper batches indicated that the people had formerly taken very good care of this binding. Some repairs had made with the rag paper similar to the original one. Others, however, with the wood cellulose paper causing new tears. Occasionally, the missing text had been restored by hand. Due to all these damages, it was decided to conserve the binding entirely. The block of the book was dismantled and each folio was treated separately. Rest of the parts of the binding were conserved as well. One of the biggest tasks for the paper conservator was the removal of the oil and wax from the paper. Best way to remove drops of wax was a mechanical cleaning with a scalpel. To remove the oil from the paper, two different ways were tested. First, we attempted to clean the paper with a hexane compress, which was successful but was considered too big of a health hazard in such a big scale. Search for better solution, we noticed that the sheets placed in between the filter papers had generated lots of oil spots on the covering papers. Then the idea came to place all the sheets on one by one between filter paper and applied slight pressure to mechanically remove the oil from the paper. Filter papers were changed several times within next months. The process was finished when no new oil spots appeared on the filter paper. As a result, the sheets were stronger, less translucent, and did not have unpleasant smell anymore. After oil removal, washing could start. As several sheets were still fragile, it was decided to wash them within hand-sewn Holotex bags to make the washing process quicker. Only few fragmented sheets were washed on the vacuum table. We also decided that the most interesting earlier repairs, which were not harmful for the binding, would be preserved. The inks used for the writing were tested for water sensibility, and they all proved to be water sensitive. Due to that, it was decided not to only dry clean and, when necessary, fix these folios. Some of the sheets were severely decayed and fragmented, and these pages were repaired by leaf casting. This method made it possible to fill in extensive losses quickly and restore the format of the sheet. When all the sheets had been repaired and dried, the folios were folded back into sections and passed on to the book conservator. And now I would also pass the screen to Tulvi. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Tulvi Turo, and I am a book conservator at Conservation Center Kanut, Tallinn, Estonia. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to have an advantage to talk about the conservation of textile wooden boards and the other parts of the book. Now I shall share my PowerPoint. So the wooden boards of the Gospel had been overlaid with red silk velvet. The material had visible damage. Textile contained wood dust, oil and glue spots, and of course tears. The color had faded. The dirt layer on the soil edges was extremely thick and compact. As the metal attachments had been fixed with nails, numerous small holes had been left in the fabric. The velvet covering was removed carefully. First treatment applied was dry cleaning with vacuum cleaner. Simultaneously, thinner candle wax spots were removed with a thin metal spatula. In order to clean the fabric from oil and wax, textile was treated with cotton swabs moistened in white spirit. The same technique was used for cleaning the dirt on the break points of the covers. The general cleaning was carried out on suction table. The tears were repaired by thermoadhesive with similar colored silk on the reverse side of the velvet. The wooden boards were dry cleaned with soft brush. The damaged edges and corners were milled and molded on the milling cutter. New parts were made and fastened with the glue. Tita bond. Decorative plates were dry cleaned with a brush and then washed in warm, soapy water. The marbled end papers were removed from the boards mechanically and washed in filtered tap water and sized with 0.5 gelatin solution. They were lined with tissue paper, then pasted onto Japanese paper satogami, and the paste used was wheat starch paste. As the board with heavy metal plates could endanger the condition of the joints, a 6 centimeter wide black calico strip, or in other words, the book binding cloth joint, was added to make the joint stronger. Next, the sheets were collated and strips of Japanese paper were pasted on the edges of single sheets. Thereafter, all the leaves were placed in between the boards on the binding press. The binding frame was prepared for sewing the binding. 4 double linen cords were made. The sheets were sewn with linen thread, 1 by 1 in pretzel stitch or 8 cross stitch. Next, the linings with Japanese paper were made. I used 30-gram Japanese paper. First, the lining number 1 was pasted onto the spine. Next, 5 Japanese paper lining strips were pasted in between the cords, and their ends reached 4 and 5 centimeters over its width. Next, the 2-color textile end bands were cleaned, their loose ends of thread were fixed, and they were lined on linen and cotton linings. Now it was their turn to be pasted onto the spine, and the last lining was 4 centimeters wider on both sides of the spine. The sewing cords were pulled through the double holes. The cord was plugged with a dowel, and the holes were first filled with a very small part of Evacon glue. The clasps were softly cleaned with steel wool of fineness 0000. All the clasp details were fixed with copper nails, just like they had been initially attached, and it was done before boards were covered with velvet fabric. The edges of the fabric were pasted with wheat starch paste and turned over the boards. On the outer sides of the boards, the fabric was kept free of paste. Close to the joint, a slit was cut to make it possible to paste the turned part of the fabric onto the inner side of the board. The spine piece was made of thicker and stronger double Japanese paper. The 5 bronze plates were fastened with copper screws. To smoothen the uneven surface of the inner side of the board, the cardboard was pasted. After that, the calico cloth joint was pasted on the inner side of the board, and next the original marbled end paper was pasted to its right position. Conclusions. The valuable gospel rescued from the burning chapel has been conserved in its original shape. It is now possible to study and to exhibit the gospel again. The treasure binding has been packed in an archive card box, waiting for the time it would be returned to the island of Piirissaar. I am very grateful for all of my colleagues for their big contribution. Estonian paper and binding conservators have worked on the bindings belonging to the Old Believers also earlier in 2006. Working on such projects have given us an opportunity to study the Old Believers' history and their valuable literary heritage. Thank you very much for your attention. To conclude, I would like to say I'm happy to have been able to share this material with you. Thank you, Kiev. Goodbye.